My next point is, and getting back to the human in the loop and us, 80% of all cyber attacks, not just ransomware, occur because someone clicks on a phishing email or a link that then enables the download of malware onto a network. So once again, I mean, you as cybersecurity practitioners, or those who are aspiring to learn more and do more in this business, it's maybe not a 1-to-1 ratio, but if you put 80% of your effort on the employees in your organization, you're definitely going to reduce your threat surface and reduce your risk when it comes to cyber attacks. And this extends to ransomware. It's mostly conducted through phishing. That's how it initially starts, and then it scales up and out from there. And I've been given I give these talks occasionally, and this point that I usually talk about, it hasn't changed since I was a young lieutenant in the United States Air Force, right? it's the constant theme throughout these 20 years, and I'm sure it won't change much despite our best efforts, is the weakest link is us, fundamentally. The thing is that in this business, as a cybersecurity professional, it's really hard to have a good day. And so our motivation has to come with the good that we are attempting and the good that we actually do. When the news comes, it's usually bad, that phone call in the middle of the night. So if we talk about, the ransomware things, there's a lot of people and a lot of companies, especially over the past 2 years, that have had some bad days, probably got that phone call in the middle of the night. And I always like to say that nothing good ever happens after 12 o'clock, midnight. And, you get that phone call in the middle of the night, it's usually never good. And certainly for these companies that have been afflicted with these ransomware attacks, that's certainly the case. So a couple of big points so far is it's not a new thing, but it's evolved tremendously over the past 20 years. The constant thread throughout all that is that the weakest link has been the human actor, whether it be an employee or whoever it might be. And it extends into ransomware. Now, let me talk about ransomware a little bit. I'm sure you're somewhat familiar, so forgive me if this is repetitive, but it's a form of malware that's designed to encrypt files on a device, usually a server that contains, or a database server that contains some sort of information that's valuable or necessary to the operations of the company. And once those files are encrypted by this malware, of course, then the users are unable to access it. And if this malware in any way impacts operations, for instance, Colonial Pipeline, which you may have heard about, and I'll talk about here in a second, it really increases the stakes for company leadership to do something about it. And so what these malicious actors want is, of course, money. It's ransomware. They want to be paid in Bitcoin, usually, or some sort of cryptocurrency. It's Bitcoin because Bitcoin can be transferred rather readily into fiat currency, which is a currency that we recognize, like the dollar or the euro or something like that. And also, it's much harder to trace. Although I'll talk about a little bit later what the US FBI has been doing along those lines. So again, let me pause there. Any questions, comments, thoughts at this point?
Yeah, Operation Epic Fail by Anonymous recently, talking about dumping out all that information from Epic's servers.
Right. And if you're a patient, like I just went in and had a hospital or a doctor's appointment, who wants their information out there? Hospitals actually through ransomware have been, as a result of this pandemic, have been targeted. And again, for me, it makes me very angry. I think it's outrageous and absolutely malicious on the part of these actors, these actors to think that, hey, if we attack a hospital, that's really we can probably squeeze, a good chunk of money out of them because they don't want their patients, either their patients' information or internet connected devices that are helping to take care of patients to disappear. So putting the cyber criminal hat on, it makes a lot of sense. But if you're on the other side of the rope, like, we are, it's infuriating. And again, we get to this moral component, this good versus evil dynamic that is baked into cyberspace at this point. So ransomware pre-pandemic, really in 2016, 17, you saw an uptick. And then there was a little bit of a downtick because the cybercrime organizations really weren't making a whole lot of money, or the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. So they turned to coin mining, and at some point in, say, around 2017, 2018, coin mining became much more lucrative. And what coin mining is a piece of software is put on a computer, and that computer's CPU cycles are used to mine Bitcoin or some form of cryptocurrency. It's just a way of expanding the footprint to be able to mine those coins faster and at lower cost, and let somebody else pay for the electricity bill. But what happened starting in 19, but especially when the pandemic took hold and everybody went virtual, is that was a significant event for the cybersecurity business because it really revealed the vulnerabilities in a company's systems. And one of the key attack vectors is for remote login. There's a lot of insecurity associated with some of the protocols, and many of these cybercrime organizations are well aware of it. So they're able to exploit those vulnerabilities. They were able to send a lot more phishing emails because people are even more dependent on things like we're doing today, Teams, Zoom, email, text, whatever. So because that type of dynamic was implemented so quickly, the cybersecurity teams really didn't have a lot of time to patch the holes, and there's still a lot scrambling. So you'll see these ransomware attacks really focusing on companies that you don't see in the headlines, like the Apples, the Microsofts, the Googles, the large banks. Normally, these large companies, Fortune 100, 500 companies, are going to have enough resources in terms of funding and talent to be able to have their own cybersecurity staffs and really run what I call a high-level professional operation. But when you get sort of below that line and you're talking to small to medium-sized companies, and when I say medium-sized, I'm talking upwards of $10 billion in gross revenue a year, something along those lines. Typically, these companies don't have the same type of resources or have not invested the resources to build out cybersecurity protections. So what these cybercrime cartels have discovered is that if they go, sort of below the line to these small to medium-sized companies, whether they're hospitals, manufacturers, pipeline companies, municipal governments are especially vulnerable at this point. They've realized that the juice is worth the squeeze. So they'll go after these quote unquote smaller organizations, and that's all relative, but I'm talking in terms of amount of revenue. But if you're an organization of say 500 people or even 1,000, the chances are you're not going to have a very robust security team to deal with these types of threats. And maybe you're thinking, oh, people don't know what they do. I mean, it's sort of security through obscurity, which is absolutely the worst thing you can do because these cybercrime cartels are opportunistic. So what they found during the pandemic, with the combination of going after companies whose security posture is likely not very good, and the fact that companies have gone to a virtual working paradigm, it's just opened up a tremendous opportunity for these cybercrime actors. I was looking at a Harvard article in preparation for this talk, and for 2020, ransomware attacks were up over 150% over the previous year. And here's the real kicker. The amount paid by the victim of those attacks increased more than 300%. So you can see that whereas ransomware may have been, hey, this is something that we'll do, but there's things that are more lucrative for us. cybercrime cartels and cybercrime organizations have found that ransomware pays, which is unbelievable. So think about this. Let's say you're Colonial Pipeline. That's a really, really great example. So you may have heard about Colonial Pipeline. The company was attacked with a ransomware attack, and it was cybercrime organizations called DarkSide, actually. They asked for 4.4 million, and the company, which is based in Georgia, it carries 2.5 million barrels a day of gasoline, diesel, heating oil, and jet fuel through 5,500 miles of pipeline. So the pipeline that supplied the East Coast was shut down because of this ransomware attack. And I think you recall, it made headlines, and there were lines at gas stations and whatnot. So the CEO decided to pay that 4.4 million ransom because, number one, he could not afford the heat he was taking and the hit that the company was taking from a reputation standpoint. And number two, it would have been more expensive not to pay. So think about that dynamic right there. And so my friend Chase says, yeah, Joe, I mean, depending on the situation, we often advise our clients to pay the ransom. Unbelievable, isn't it? But it happens. Obviously, if there's been a 300% increase, you can see that ransomware and cybercrime clearly pays. So let me pause there. There's a lot of material there. Any thoughts or comments?
Well, for me, it's pretty amazing when you think about the fact that it's better to pay than to lose all the money and revenue to have the gas offline take the hit. What's more amazing is that you would think that these companies would have recognized that they're vulnerable and would have had some type of prevention in place in the event that this happened, some type of redundancy backup. I'm assuming it was control of their systems so they could not, physically operate their systems to move, the energy they had.
That's correct.
So what is the backup alternative? Someone steals, and obviously you have some kind of redundancy. If one environment is compromised, you can switch to another.
Yeah, hindsight's always 2020. I actually participated in the state of Missouri in the United States. There's an annual energy provider conference that the state sponsors. So in St. Louis, the large energy provider is called Ameren, and I actually know the chief information security officer. They have a very well-run and forward-leaning organization, but there are many, many companies, not just in Missouri, but across the country in the United States, these small local utility providers that aren't nearly the scale of a company like Ameren, which supplies energy to half of Missouri and most of Southern Illinois. But if you talk about a company that's supplying, power in a rural area to maybe a county or two or something like that, they aren't going to have the money or the wherewithal to be able to fund a staff of professionals like Ameren does or another company like that. So these then become lucrative targets. I'll talk about some of the things that, that companies can do, and you identified a couple already, but when you don't have the staff that actually can advise you on it, and it costs money to bring in advisors, and it costs money to bring in equipment, to deploy technology, institute procedures and operations, it becomes a very, very daunting task. And, like I said, municipal governments are particularly vulnerable. And you see these cybercrime organizations, going at the city of Baltimore was afflicted with, was attacked with ransomware. The talks that I give about cybersecurity, I always tell people, if you come here to be inspired and uplifted, this is not the talk for you. But there's so many challenges and so many problems for us to deal with that, the good thing about being a cybersecurity professional is we'll never be out of a job, right? There's plenty of work to be done. So that's a little bit about ransomware. And, the other thing about what's happening is, I talked about this gray area between nation state capability and, let's say, vanilla cybercrime activity. Think about this. If you're a drug cartel, a multinational drug cartel, you're going to be able to hire the best chemist, the best supply chain experts. Obviously, these folks are going to be corrupt, right? Or else they wouldn't jump to the other side. But some people don't have, a moral compass. The same thing is happening on the cybercrime side of the house. They can afford to hire now, and they're cultivating, computer scientists and technology experts and recruiting them to their teams because it's so doggone lucrative. And again, the risk of being apprehended or thrown in jail are so low. So what we're seeing is the level of sophistication of these these cyber criminals is approaching that of nation states. So that's number one. Number two is the scale at which these cybercrime organizations are able to operate is also approaching nation state capability. Like I'll talk about, there was an attack that leveraged, actually, it's an IT service provider, a managed services piece of software called Kaseya. Thousands and thousands and thousands of customers, multiple companies. And so this attack, which was driven by a cybercrime organization called R-Evil, it's the letter R and then evil. That pretty much sums it up. They were able to infiltrate this service provider's software, implant the software, and then as it was been fielded and rolled out, patches were rolled out, things of that nature, just the normal things you would do as an IT service provider to keep the software up to date. Well, guess what? The malware rolled out with it to everybody that was using this software. And then that gave this company access, not just to one company, but hundreds. And they were charging each of these companies $10,000 each, as they went about encrypting all their information, $10,000 each to go ahead and give them the decryption keys so they could get back to business. So you multiply 10,000 times 1,000, you're getting into the seven-figure area. It's a very sophisticated and very clever way of conducting a cyber attack or a ransomware attack. And the types of tools they're using are also approaching nation state capability. There's been a lot of leaks. The Snowden affair back a few years ago really did a lot of damage, a lot of tradecraft, a lot of the tools have been released into the wild, and you see these cybercrime organizations picking them up, leveraging them, and then also, although I don't see a lot of it happening now, I think it will in the future, we'll see these cybercrime cartels start to develop their own very sophisticated, and let's call it nation state level malware. So folks, we're in a whole new world when it comes to cybercrime. And my forecast is that we really haven't seen anything yet. Any comments, questions on that piece?
Well, Marion actually posted a comment, which I thought was interesting. She said that she had learned that, some of these bad actors will intentionally infect systems and then lay low for extended periods of time so that they have access to the backups, the redundancies, just like what you were kind of mentioning. And so therefore, they're willing to wait, right? It's not a quick payday for them. They're waiting to get maximum benefit out of these ransomware attacks, which then kind of alluded to what you were saying, is that if we can infect multiple systems and get $10,000 each, they're obviously getting sophisticated about where is the sweet spot to, get paid versus they're going to just wait it out. Where we're doing the ransom attacks, how much we think we can get out of these ransom attacks, how long we wait before we let them know that we've now attacked them and engaged it. So there's a whole thought process and theory behind how sophisticated these ransomware attacks are getting.
Absolutely. And we see that more and more. It's not just a smash and grab type of operation. It's a very sophisticated with a lot of surveillance. And once an actor gains access to a system, which is really what it's all about, is gaining access, then the next step is not just to understand how the technology interacts and where the vulnerabilities are in that infrastructure, but it's understanding how the people in the organization actually interact. Part of the ransomware and part of cybercrime in general is there's these phishing emails are becoming harder and harder to identify, because if you're laying low on a network and you're just listening and gathering information, you're learning more about how that organization actually operates and does business. And then you can surgically pinpoint how you go about conducting an attack at a time and place of your choosing. And as a former military officer, being able to conduct an attack at a time and place of your choosing with overwhelming force, right? That's exactly where you want to be. Unfortunately, as a defender, when the attacker has that kind of advantage, it makes it very, very difficult to be able to protect an organization. And that's exactly the dynamic that many of these companies find themselves caught up in at this point in time. The General Dynamics has come up with a model called the cyber kill chain, which it's a nicely laid out way of how a malicious actor will actually go about planning for and then actually conducting an attack. So that surveillance piece that I talked about earlier, that's that's at the very beginning of the cyber kill chain. And so our job as cyber professionals is to interdict that kill chain or actually deny a malicious actor or anyone for that matter the ability to actually implement that process or to attempt to run what we call the cyber kill chain. So we talked about Colonial Pipeline. So I said the CEO paid the 4.4 million. But the other side of the story that I don't think was as loudly broadcast is that the FBI was able to trace the transfer of the Bitcoin in the cryptocurrency world and actually recover just about all of that money. And so the FBI, the US FBI, and I would imagine that other national and international law enforcement organizations have really stepped up their game and are being much more aggressive about going and, at least after the fact, helping companies recover money and then also cooperating and conducting law enforcement operations to actually apprehend perpetrators. For me, the costs need to be raised dramatically to disincentivize these malicious actors from conducting these attacks in the first place. But again, it's a very resource-based and technical challenge for these law enforcement operations. But I think the fact that the FBI has been able to go back and recoup that money is really a good thing. And, so good on them for doing that. There's some question about, so in order to get the money from a crypto wallet, you have to have, if you know anything about cryptocurrency, there's a public key and a private key. It's called asymmetric cryptography. And it's a very, very secure, the algorithms themselves are unbreakable. And, I've taught a cryptography class here at Washington University, so I know whereof I speak. So mathematically, and the way these algorithms are designed, they're uncrackable. So the FBI didn't realize or didn't reveal how they were able to attain that private key. But my suspicion is that they were able to find the server that these private keys were held on. And these cyber criminals probably didn't have very good password protection or encryption for those private keys. And then therefore the FBI was able to do what it needed to do to recover that key and then also then go back to the crypto wallet, use the key and recover the Bitcoin. So those types of things, give me hope that law enforcement is able to conduct those post-crime operations. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering because one of the major press points for cryptocurrency is that they're untraceable,
Mhm.
especially with Bitcoin. How would they have gotten that information? Or would they have seized like the machine, the physical machine, and been able to access it from there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the transactions actually are traceable, and there are companies out there now that are helping either law enforcement or companies or organizations actually trace these transactions because there is such a thing called Bitcoin theft. And so there are tools and techniques and procedures that are able to, trace the transactions. The whole key is finding where the Bitcoin is stored. And that's what the FBI did. And these cyber cartels, they're very savvy. They will go through many, many different transactions in Bitcoin wallets to obscure their tracks. It's just like it's the cryptocurrency form of money laundering. It passes through multiple hands and multiple locations. In this case, it's all done digitally. But that is, from a high level, how the FBI was able to do that.
So, Joe, this is pretty fascinating to me because when you think about the process and the fact that they were able to recover, first of all, the ransom had to get paid. So it gets paid. Then the systems have got to be cleaned, scrubbed. All the ransomware has to be removed. A new system has to be put online. Then the FBI has to go in and recover those funds, all in a coordinated effort and timing to ensure that they can't continue to hold those systems ransom. Right? They got to get them out of there. So to have that all happen within a short period of time is pretty incredible when you think about it. And I'm not even sure what the process would look like for that. I don't know if you could share your thoughts on that.
Well, that's the FBI. I'd have to understand their tradecraft, and obviously they aren't really willing to share what that is. And the second part of that is I'd have to bring my colleague, Dr. Ning Zhang, who used to be one of the world's top white hat hackers, to actually explain the technical ins and outs of it. So.
But that in itself answers it. And then the message that it's sent out there to everybody else saying, if you do this, we're smarter than you.
Yeah, we can get you. And
We
we're going to
can
catch
get
you.
you.
Yeah. Now, one other thing as the aftermath of the colonial pipeline is dark side, right? There's no longer a cybercrime organization called dark side, because we know who some of these actors are because they name themselves, and you can kind of trace their footprints. But dark side got so much bad publicity, they basically disbanded, right? And they probably reconstituted under a new name, a new organization. But so think about it from a business perspective. The whole idea is to get companies and organizations to pay. And so if you get bad press, that's not good. The other thing about these cybercrime cartels, particularly when it comes to ransomware, they're very customer friendly, right? They're going to say, I actually read the email that went to Colonial Pipeline. It's like, we don't care about your business. We don't care about the impact. We want to get paid. But when, there are thousands of people not getting gas, they're like, uh-oh, we went a little bit too far. So, there's incentive on the part of these malicious actors to actually have a little bit of trust among thieves, right? So if we pay you, are you actually going to give us the keys? If you don't give the keys, then that's going to be bad for business. So it's really interesting, this dynamic that comes into play here.
Well, from a marketing perspective, I think it's pretty incredible, because you don't think about the fact that they're operating as a true entity that's marketing, that's, selling their services, that don't want to push the envelope too far, because then that might impact the next engagement, right? It's all a revenue stream. It's a full-on enterprise business that you don't think about behind it. Typically, at least I would think about ransomware as attacks of these individual Joes in the basement, like you said before, eating pizza, drinking, but it's not. It's an enterprise. It's a company. It's so it's a big deal.
Yeah, totally. And that's been a trend, is these organizations, have professionalized and have really turned it into a business. I mean, you can, if you want to go onto the dark web and hire a hacker to write a piece of custom malicious code for you, you can do it for $1,000, $5,000. I mean, it's inexpensive. You can actually hire a company to conduct an attack, a cyber attack, ransomware, what have you, on a per seat basis. Maybe it's $100 a seat, and they'll go and conduct the attack for you. Where it's come from in just 20 years, but even over the past 3 to 5 years, has just been astonishing how much more organized and I'll call it professional that these organizations are. The REvil gang demanded a $50 million ransom from a computer manufacturer called Quanta, which is a major business partner of Apple. So Quanta refused negotiations. And so what REvil did is they targeted Apple, and they had stolen blueprints for, intellectual property, whether it's devices or the things that Apple wanted to keep secret, and they threatened to leak more of them. And then it kind of went off the radar. So what I'm assuming is that probably Apple and Quanta negotiated an off-the-book settlement and actually paid REvil something. That's just my guess. I'm not sure. Kia. Some of you may drive a Kia vehicle. They were attacked, and is the Doppelpaymer gang demanded a $20 million ransom. But the highest reported ransomware payment to date, reported that is $10 million. So expect to see more of these in the future. As an organization, the things that as a cybersecurity professional you should be doing is having a robust incident response plan. Is in this business, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And then on top of that, rehearsing it. So in order to have a plan, it has to be, it's great to have a plan, but it's better to practice it. Having the buy-in and support of your company leadership is absolutely critical. The other thing is to make sure that you have a good cyber insurance policy. The cyber insurers are starting to get more sophisticated. And actually, it used to be easier to get cyber insurance, but unless you can demonstrate some level of protection, I mean, basic protections, you may get denied cyber insurance. And that industry is, that's a whole nother talk, actually. The cyber insurance is not your fail-safe. It's a necessary but not sufficient form of protection. The other thing is multi-factor authentication. So I'm sure, maybe you all use like your banking apps nowadays, but when you log in, they ask you, we need to send you a code via text so that you're able to log in. So it's, that's two-factor. What they're talking now about is even two-factor is not enough. So, multi-factor, rolling out some form of multi-factor authentication. Here's something. Let's say if a ransomware does attack, this is something that's not often thought of. So if all your IT systems are shut down, it's really important to have a secure channel for communication. So that may mean, a secure texting app that you are able to communicate with your team and leadership about, hey, what do we do? Talking over the phone, maybe you're not able to trust your IP phones. Maybe they've infiltrated that. So having a secure way to communicate, very, very important. Train employees on how to identify phishing emails and educate them on how these things happen. That is absolutely fundamental and indispensable. Matter of fact, if you start with anything, start with this. And like I said before, if 80% of the attacks that happen are due to a human clicking on a malicious email link or something like that, then it's well worth spending the time to educate and train your employees on how not to do that.
Well, I'm just going to say this, Joe. I've been on a couple other events with your team. And one thing while you were speaking about things that you could do that was coming to my mind had to do with the resources and recognizing that cybersecurity is really 20% IT, 80% human people, the human interaction piece, the learning about it, the how to infiltrate. So one thing that your organization through GCC has informed me and inspired me about is that when you're hiring these resources for your SOC team, who are ultimately going to be responsible for identifying and stopping that kill chain, is to make sure that you're hiring a diverse pool of resources, even people potentially on the spectrum, because they think outside of the box.
Right.
And so as part of your defense strategy, it really should be also looking at the resources that you're bringing on board to combat that human element and nature that we're seeing coming into cybersecurity. So
100%. Yeah. Well said.
And Joe, just thank you so much.
Yeah. Good luck, everybody. I wish you all nothing but success in your career. I really enjoyed it. And if you have any questions or anything for me, feel free to shoot me a note. Happy to chat more.